Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel on creating stronger partnerships for global food security. My name is David Evans, and I'm Chief of Global Philanthropy at UNICEF. Very, very delighted to be here, and really delighted to be joined by a very impressive panel. And I'll just introduce them from your left to right. First, we have Hunter Biden, who's chairman of the board of the World Food Programme USA and a partner at Rosemont Seneca Partners, LLC. I think you all probably know WFP. It's an organization we at UNICEF work with very closely in the field. Just a huge, largest humanitarian agency devoted to the issue of food security and hunger. Reached 80 million people last year with food services, and is often very much in the lead in humanitarian situations. And I know we were just talking already in Nepal, there's WFP staff on the ground reaching out to the populations affected, which is fantastic to hear. Next, we have Mpule Kwela-Gobe, who is CEO of the Mpule Institute for Endogenous Development. I was quite excited when I heard the word endogenous, but apparently it means, what does it mean?
It means development that's from within.
Oh, okay, all right,
yes.
Okay. I thought it was something else, but no. So, right. Also a board member of the Agriculture and Food Security Center at the Earth Institute at Columbia University, my alma mater. So that must be very, very good. And next we have Greg Page, who's the executive chairman of Cargill. Who doesn't really know Cargill? Really a market leader in so many agricultural markets and agribusinesses, as well as working on supply chains and supporting communities where it operates. As a food company, Cargill has a long commitment to strengthening food security around the world. So it's great to have you with us. And lastly, but by no means least, we have Axton Salim, who is director of Indo Foods in Indonesia, which is part of the Salim Group. And I think it's very interesting to have Greg and Axton, because it's two companies working in this sector. But of course, the challenge or the opportunity for Indo Foods is that they are right in a country which there's fast economic growth, but there's also within the country in which they're based, there's also real issues around food security for marginalized populations. So I'm sure it's great to see so many of you here, and I'm sure you know a little bit about the issue, but I just thought I'd put a bit of context in, and then we get the conversation going. And of course, we've made huge progress in this area in recent decades. If you think about countries like China, for hundreds of years, racked by famines, periodic famines. But now the challenge in China is around adult onset diabetes. If you look at the number of people we've lifted out of poverty in the last 20 years, it's about 1 billion. But still, why? 45% of deaths among children under 5 are the underlying cause is lack of access to nutrition. That's 8,000 children dying a day. If you look at something as simple as iodine, putting iodine in your salt, iodine deficiency is the most prevalent cause of preventable brain damage, but still, decades after all our salt in the Western world is iodized, 30% of the world does not have iodized salt. And this intervention, I think, costs between 2 cents, maybe 10 to 15 cents per child per year. There are still 160 million children under 5 globally who are suffering from stunting. And this, studies prove, equates to about 1 to 2 years of schooling in terms of their intellectual development. So this has a knock-on effect on their economic opportunities and their growth as citizens for these countries. Here in America, still 25% of military families need help putting food on the table. And 1 in 7 Americans, 46 million people, are accessing food pantries and the like to feed themselves. So some of these statistics are a bit gloomy. Is the breadbasket of the world half full, half empty, or is it just some people's bread baskets are full and some people's are empty? Hunter, do you want to just situate us on where the world is standing in the fight for access to nutrition today?
Well, I think you did a pretty good job of laying out the challenges that we face. Obviously, we haven't completed the work that was started at the World Food Program in the late 60s, early 70s. But the fact of the matter is that this is an incredibly exciting time to be a part of this cause. Hunger, I believe, is something that we can actually solve. And what we're seeing today in terms of the level of innovation that is coming from the private sector, that's coming from governments, that's coming from inside the UN, it's coming from people like Mpule and organizations that she runs, and Axton and Greg and their companies, and the way that they're partnering with organizations like the WFP. It's incredibly exciting. We've seen the number of hungry people drop in the world, but at the same time, we face enormous challenges. There are the highest number of level 3, which is the highest level of emergency that we face in terms of the way that the UN grades it, the way that WFP grades it, that we've faced since World War II. And a lot of that has to do with 2 things, of which this community, as it relates to the NGOs and the quasi-governmental and governmental bodies, don't have any direct control over. Well, that's not true. Governmental bodies may have direct control over this, and that's civil conflict and climate change. And what we're seeing as a result of climate change is the number of emergencies, for instance, the number of typhoons in the Philippines and the Pacific, and a whole host of other issues as it relates to drought in sub-Saharan Africa that we don't have control over. So as we see the numbers of people that are actually hungry reduce, and we see those numbers consistently going down, we also see these emergencies that seem intractable. And so I don't want to take up too much of the opening here, but what I was hoping that we would get out of this session is afterwards I get to talk to each one of you about the way in which you're going to actually help and partner with WFP and other organizations, the way that Cargill has, the way that Axton's company has, the way that Mpule has, to actually solve this problem. Because I think that if everyone in this room and the expertise that you bring actually came to us, we're ready to listen and actually start to implement some of the incredible innovations that are out there that I know that your companies have capacity to actually share. So,
right. Mpule, in your evolution as an activist in this area, I think you've got a very deep understanding of how the nutrition issue really is actually a nexus of other issues and related to so many things. And often in the development space, we think of it as a kind of magic bullet because it's related to some other things. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you started working with women affected by HIV/AIDS maybe 10 or 15 years ago now. But can you just explain how you came to the realization or the aha moment that you wanted to focus on this area of agricultural development and access to nutrition?
Thank you so much, David. So you're absolutely right. I began my career as a development economist 15 years ago, running a fund for health systems, especially HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. And a lot of the work that we did was concentrated in Botswana, where I was born and raised. So working with women who were HIV positive, one of the things that becomes very evident quickly is the need for nutrition. The governor of Botswana was one of the first African governments to give free ARV medication to any person that was testing HIV positive. But people needed to eat healthy meals and a healthy, balanced diet in order for them to take the medication and for the medication to be effective. So that was the first thing that we became aware of as we were launching intervention programs in Botswana, is the need for nutrition. But we also realized that we couldn't really address HIV/AIDS in a silo. We had to actually look at it at the nexus of issues. And I think even when it comes to food security, that's really something that we're going to need to do, is instead of just focusing on the sector itself, as one of the ways of addressing global food security is to really look at all the other nexus sectors that intersect with agriculture. So we looked at nutrition and then, of course, just overall human development, right? Because you're also then talking about pregnant women that potentially could transmit the virus to their children and giving them medication to stop mother-to-child transmission. So we began to look at HIV/AIDS within the scope of human development and then to work ourselves backwards and say, well, from human development, you're going to find nutrition and then food security and then agriculture. But what really appealed to us within agriculture was also looking at economic empowerment of women. Because one of the strangest things that we encountered within our work on HIV/AIDS was that it was actually really more of an economic crisis, but obviously the implications for it were health related and the interventions had to be health related. But ultimately, women really needed economic empowerment, and a lot of the women we came across were rural women or women living or operating within the informal sector and somehow dependent on the upstream side of agriculture. So for example, running the food markets within the urban economies. So we began to identify that if we invest in agriculture, we're going to really hit a lot of the key issues that were impacting the women that we're working with.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think women in Africa as producing, I think smallholders were producing about 80% of the food. I think what's interesting for us at UNICEF is also that women in the communities can be a great key to actually getting access to nutrition for their community. We have these community-based nutrition programs where women in the community regularly monitor the children, and we have this great, amazing tape measure our innovation unit has developed. You just measure the circumference of a child's arm, and this will give you within 95% accuracy an estimation of their weight, and then you can see if any of the kids are running into trouble and then refer them to nutrition programs. So I think our experience on not only in the production of food, but also in addressing nutrition issues when they arise, we've found that women are actually absolute pillars, particularly in African communities. So that's certainly our experience.
I mean, just a quick thing, you're pointing out something that's very important when looking at the agriculture sector, especially in Africa. 50% of all the farming is done by women. And like you said, they produce 80% of the food, and yet they only get about 10% of the incomes and own about 1% of the assets. And yet they play very dominant roles, not just as food producers, but also as family food managers and as the people that largely dominate in the food markets.
Great.
So you pointed out a very critical key, which is that women are actually the secret key to fighting hunger and poverty.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, so I think as I understand it, over the last 10 years or so, Cargill's CSR has sort of moved away from, unrelated, not unrelated, but less directly related charitable activities to really focus in on activities which are really related to your business. Now, the kind of world that we and I was just discussing with Mpule, smallholders in Africa, say, and working to develop them, that's really a long way from the kind of big businesses that and markets that you're working on. Have you been able to deploy the skills and the knowledge and the know-how of your people to kind of promote food production at the bottom of the pyramid?
I think it's one of the misperceptions about Cargill that it's simply an organization that markets the crops of large farmers. And in point of fact, we're one of the world's largest cocoa processors. So in a given year in the Ivory Coast alone, we will buy cocoa from 250,000 farmers.
Okay.
We make 50,000 microloans a year in Zambia, eastern Zambia, in order to originate the cotton that we process and export. And so we can go market by market, and small farmers in Central America that grow livestock for us, which we would then process and market on their behalf. And so certainly we have changed the focus of our corporate social responsibility to really focus on food security and on sustainable supply chains. And we do that because we see it as work that we have advantaged capabilities. We can leverage our monetary gifts with the knowledge of our employees. And so that's been an important thing. It's also been important to the brands of the consumer packaged goods companies who are Cargill's customers. So Nestle cares how the ingredients that go into their foods arrive there, and who we bought them from, how we treated that person in that relationship, and what care we took in the intervening steps. And so that's really where we spend our time. The sustainability, the sustainable supply chains have also become important, as well as being responsible. And there is where we work with these smallholders to try to improve their yields. But it's not just to improve their yields, it's to reduce their input costs, since the comment that Mpule made is they don't have net revenue. I think one of the things that's poorly understood about agricultural development, one, there is no such thing as a global food problem. There's multi-local food problems. And the prescriptions are very different. You mentioned China. 20% of the people, according to the FAO, that are undernourished or are food insecure are in China. 40% are farmers. And so when you think about working with the kinds of people we work with who are commercial farmers, they just happen to be smallholders. But then there are a whole host of other people that are really subsistence farmers. And so I'll end with the important thought that often gets missed is the most critical element to improving food security in the world is non-farm income. Because without that, there is no cash that flows back to this lady that is sat by her stall somewhere, or the prices she receives are inadequate to allow her to buy inputs. So in an agricultural system where even the smallest of farmers don't have net revenue, they will over time mine the nutrients of their soil, and inevitably the yields will decline because there is no net new input resources in the absence of philanthropy. So for us, a sustainable and responsible supply chain is one that's highly dependent on the revenue stream that comes to those farmers.
Okay. And I think partners that you're working with, do you want to talk about some of the partnerships that you're working with on sort of livelihood generation? I think you're working with CARE and others in the area.
So in CARE, across a variety of countries, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, as well as 5 or 6 countries in Africa, the focus is first on primary health care, second on water. And the interesting thing is the cleaner the water gets, the less you have to spend on health care. Shouldn't come as a surprise, but it's been remarkable to watch. Just getting really great water quality in these communities has a dramatic impact. Then we work on yields. And so in the Ivory Coast, clearly the price that you receive for properly handled cocoa beans versus improperly handled is dramatic. And so a lot of the work is eliminating post-harvest loss, or having them cure and ferment their beans in a way that will attract the highest possible price in Europe, for instance. So a lot of these are what go under the all too encompassing category of capacity building, but it's really education.
I was hearing some pretty scary figures. I don't know whether you knew about post-harvest loss and how much food is, or I don't know whether you know how serious this is in Mpule. Do you want to, either of you, talk about that in terms of the people that you serve, you work with?
Well, certainly with the people that we work with, if you raise cotton that's attracting a very good price, they're not going to lose it. And so similarly with cocoa beans, it's knowing how to do it. And so in a lot of cases, we try to provide the physical infrastructure, in many cases, the drying, the refrigeration, or whatever may be required further into the supply chain. But our observation is a huge amount of the waste is in perishables, in fresh fruits and vegetables, and particularly ones that are seasonal. And to me, an unfortunate thing that's going on in the global food chain is the disparagement of preserved foods, either dehydrated or quick frozen or canned. And we've extolled fresh produce to the detriment of the fact that we're all here, which is because we've found food preservation that takes us from season to season. And so a lot of this wastage is around inappropriate planting decisions relative to the size of the market that they can serve. And you can go anywhere in the world and everyone, small farmers, they all get their tomatoes at the same time.
Yeah.
And in the absence of preservation investments, we're not going to lick this problem.
So Axton, I'm not sure I mentioned, in addition to your role with Indofoods, you're also, I think, is it co-chair of the Sun
Advisory Board.
Sun Advisory Board. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And also the challenge that you see in Indonesia, it's a country I know well, obviously economic development, but pockets of, and it's particularly in the east of Indonesia, where stunting is still an issue, and access to nutrition, and talk about how Indofoods is working to address that.
Yep. I think just to add on to David and Hunter, I think it's definitely a big challenge. And the global context of the problem can be seen with the 165 million children under 5 who are stunted as a result of malnutrition. They are unlikely to ever reach the human potential that is promised each human at birth. At least 52 million are so thin that require special nutrition interventions, while 43 million are still obese, and that's due to improper nutrition as well, and that's due to poverty. And the under 5 critically malnourished group is also joined by 2 billion of our fellow humans who have deficiency in key vitamins and minerals. That's actually 1 in every 3 humans. So about the Sun movement. The Sun movement, the scaling up is also known as scaling up nutrition. And the Sun movement began as a renewed effort to eliminate all forms of malnutrition based on the principles that everyone has a right of food and good nutrition. It is a joint effort created by representatives of 50 sovereign governments, agencies, private firms, and NGOs who are not willing to accept the malnutrition in some countries were not decreasing despite of economic growth. So this unique movement actually brings the government, civil society, UN network, donors, business, and scientists in a collective action to try to improve nutrition. So we Indofood actually participate in the Sun network as part of the business network. I think the Sun business network also includes Cargill, whose chairman is a co-panelist today, and the business group is dedicated to finding means and implementing programs to end malnutrition through businesses, markets, and our direct connection to customers. So just to put into perspective why businesses, I think the private sector has always had a unique ability to look at gaps in the market and then efficiently find solutions, and the best thing is execute. Most people across the globe rely on direct contact to private businesses for the food products and services to meet their needs. Private sector's responsive and commercial initiative create powerful capabilities to place products and services where they're needed and accessible in most efficient ways, which is the most critical part to effective implementation of programs to fight malnutrition. I think our great panel on this today, actually, that's one of the demonstrations that we see. And on that note, I'm just going to zoom into Indonesia. So Indonesia has 7 million children who are stunted right now, with who are under 5 who are stunted. And as David say, in one of the most impoverished and most geographically remote areas, which is East Nusa Tenggara province, the percentage of stunted children is as high as 58%, and 13% experience wasting. Then we pick 2 areas, which is Kupang and South Central Timor. These are areas that are considered to be the most food insecure due to an increasingly hard to predict growing season, which in turn intensifies the likelihood that a young child will fall into acute malnutrition. So I'm going to go into one of the programs that we do actually with Scaling Up Nutrition and also with WFP, which is Project Laserbeam. So WFP took on the leadership of Project Laserbeam to eradicate child malnutrition through cross-industry collaborations, which I think is the main focus for this panel discussion today. So the network shared the discussion with private businesses, members, it allows a holistic approach to nutrition programs, beginning from breastfeeding, improved breastfeeding, complementary feeding, increased treatment of acute nutrition, increased household food security, and focus on health and hygiene. So the program was built on public-private partnership that is scalable, replicable, and sustainable for the use in other countries and regions. So the program element, which is the maternal and child nutrients, it's by thoughtfully advising the government and welcoming the private sector's nutrition leaders, WFP managed to develop intervening models and analytical tools and evidence-based reporting on the fact of the 1,000 days. So Indofood used the WFP findings to produce fortified complementary food for children 6 to 23 months for the prevention of stunting. And the program currently has reached 10,000 children and 5,000 lactating pregnant mothers as of last year. So, and another ongoing part of the project is the local food-based school meal program, which provides hot, nutritious meals fortified with vitamins and micronutrients to local schools about 3 days a week. And it's used available commodities such as maize and mung bean. The program is accompanied by comprehensive behavior change communication on home fortification with nutrient powders, health and hygiene, and good nutrition practices. So this program addresses the causes of child undernutrition and also how different partners can implement a program together from different angles. The government is still the focal point in where the local food-based meal programs are part of the government's effort to revitalize the national school feeding program. The communities play a big role as the parents of the students contribute time to cook the meals at school and provide additional locally grown ingredients. WFP monitors the program and plays a bridging role among the stakeholders. DSM provides the micronutrient powders, which are packaged by Indofood and into locally acceptable sizes and delivery systems, then distributed to the schools. And Unilever supports the local food-based fortified school meals through funding, but even more powerfully brings out the hand washing campaigns to the schools, as hygiene is one of the most important causes that might hinder the malnutrition and the efforts to reduce malnutrition. And Mondelez joined the program with its home state food production system, which trains and assists families to grow micronutrient-rich crops and raise poultry and implement aquaculture, in which Helen Keller International rolls out the home state food program model.
Wonderful.
And the most important part is actually gain the global
Alliance for improved,
Global Alliance
for improved
nutrition has agreed to coordinate and measure the overall Laserbeam project. They provide performance, and twice yearly they monitor and follow up with the analysis, distributing the reports and sharing the partners and the results.
Wonderful.
So right now, just to put it into context, I think 424,000 children have been reached in Indonesia, and I think the Bangladesh program has reached about 2.5 million people.
I think,
so
I mean, I mean, it's quite hard to go through that in depth, but I think, you know, what we heard was a lot about evaluation. We heard multi-partners, the education, local government, WFP. We heard about rigorous monitoring and evaluation. We heard about different companies through the Sun Business Network deploying their skills and expertise. So that actually, if you look at it, is a great sort of paradigm, and it does illustrate one point, is that the solutions are kind of simple, but the implementation is very, very complex because of the complexity of some of these supply chains. So Hunter, in your experience at WFP, you know, we were very struck at another organization I was working with at the Global Fund, the challenge of getting our medicines into villages seemed daunting, but every village that we came to, there would seem to be Coke would be available in nice refrigerated units. So in terms of getting stuff to the ground, how successful have you been of been mixing the public and private, and what are some of the models that you would pick up that have worked on that area?
Well, the number one, what Indofood has been able to do is astounding, and I'd also like to say that Greg is being modest, and that Cargill is the perfect example of a partner for the World Food Program. They have done an amazing amount, and not only in simple cash, not simple, but cash assistance in large amounts over the past 15 years, a great deal of it when Greg was the CEO, and now through the time he's been executive chairman. And also in-kind donations, and also expertise, and also employee engagement. And one of the companies that we are most excited about in terms of all four of those areas right now also is UPS. UPS for us has been an amazing partner for exactly the reason that you're talking about. You know, if you look at WFP, one of the things, I think it's one of the least known but most utilized humanitarian organization in the world. We are in 76 countries, as you said, 80 million people that are fed. But the fact of the matter is that there's other organizations, and also on top of that, WFP does all of the logistics, all of the supply chain management for all of the other humanitarian organizations within the UN. They do all of the telecom cluster in any case, in any emergency. But there are people that actually do it even better. And one of those people is the people that deliver more packages in the world, around the world, in more countries, and that's UPS. And so what UPS has been able to provide to us in terms of simple expertise as it relates to supply chain management and in terms of logistics has been absolutely amazing. They have these LET teams, which are basically the way that I describe it, UPS employee SWAT teams in times of emergencies. In which, well, I'll give you an example. When 30 days after Typhoon Haiyan, Rick Leach, who's here with me, who should be up on this stage, because I'm a voluntary chairman of the board. He actually knows what he's talking about. We land in Tacloban 30 days after, and it's still, the devastation is absolutely amazing. If you remember, 30-foot storm surges that went miles inland. And the first people on the ground were what I call them basically the special forces of the Marines of the UN was WFP. Well, actually, U.S. Marines were the first people on the ground, but then WFP. And then right behind them, volunteers from UPS that set up a staging area and then provided their expertise as to how to develop the supply chain to move inland, to move in Tacloban, to move to the rest of the country, and to move to the outer islands. Which is also, for instance, when in the case of the Ebola outbreak, if it weren't for WFP and their ability to rely on companies like UPS, which in Cologne, Germany, created a staging area where all of the supplies that were going into the rest of the country as related to the Ebola outbreak and all of the health needs that were needed, whether it was generators or whether it was medicine, were what came to UPS and UPS employees, and they provided everything from forklifts to expertise to planes to, and so those are the kind of partnerships that are kind of obvious. The Cargill partnerships are very obvious. I mean, in the sense that it makes, you can see that there is a direct link between what WFP does and the core business of Cargill or Indofood or of UPS. One of the places, and I don't want to take up too much time, but one of the other places that is interesting is in places that you wouldn't necessarily think there would be a connection. And for us right now, one of those is MasterCard. So vast majority of the aid that we're providing through WFP to Syrian refugees right now in Lebanon and Jordan is through a debit card. And it is having an amazing impact not only on the dignity of a refugee, to be able to go into a local market and not be seen as as basically draining the local economy, but adding to the local economy, and also being able to make their own choices as to what they want to buy or what they need for their family. And there are things like that, these innovations that, again, I appeal to all of you that are either listening to this or that are in the audience right now, that you don't see necessarily the direct connection, but I promise you, in terms of what Mpule pointed out, what she realized with HIV and AIDS and her work there, is that nutrition and food is kind of the foundation of all of that. Yeah. You can't, and empowerment of women, empowerment of families, school feeding programs, and I think that there's probably not a sector in the economy, in any economy around the world, business sector, that doesn't have something to contribute to this cause. And I have a lot more stories, but I might,
we'll get back to it.
I'm a Biden. I could filibuster for the entire thing. But the truth is, I want to hear from Mpule and Greg.
The family resemblance somewhere. But Mpule, so you've got these great smallholder women, fantastic. They sound like a pretty good bet for some kind of business investment somehow, but it's, in terms of getting access to capital, it's a challenge. And probably every year at this conference there's a discussion around the impact investing phenomenon, and my view on that is that it's been a challenge to grow this sector because it's an expensive way of doing business. How do you think we can actually get capital to some of these businesses so they can grow?
So here's the thing. For me, a starting point is that I'm actually the granddaughter of smallholder farmers. I didn't know that that's what my grandparents were, but once I began doing this work, I learned that they were smallholder farmers. So I don't romanticize the lives of smallholder farmers because they really lead very challenging lives. Smallholder farmers in Africa are some of the poorest people and suffering some of the highest levels of malnourishment, especially when you look at women and children. And some of the great initiatives that, for example, the Sun Movement is working on is the 1,000 days and the importance of nutrition within the first 1,000 days in a child's life. But what we find, of course, is that women that are suffering from malnutrition will give birth to babies that naturally are suffering from malnutrition. So I don't romanticize their lives at all, and I think that we need to move more financing to smallholder farmers and to women, and to really turn them into entrepreneurs, and to do a better job of helping them to access supply chains. And I think this is where some of the challenges begin to come, is when you talk about supply chains, especially modern supply chains, because they do come with standards, especially when it comes to quality standards that these smallholder farmers have to be able to meet. So how do we do so? How do we get smallholder farmers, these female farmers that already are facing this burden of having to grow so much of the food, but still using traditional implements and without the financing to be able to develop their land? one of the things that we have to do is then begin to really break down the agriculture value chain and the supply chain and understand where the interventions are most needed by smallholder farmers. So they do need the financing so that they can develop their land and get better seeds and be able to get other tools that they may need, whether it's fertilizer or any other tools, maybe even more sophisticated tools to use in their farming. But we also need to work in helping smallholder farmers aggregate. And I think this is where probably Cargill is doing an excellent job, is working with smallholder farmers, but because they're aggregated within your supply chain, is that they're able to get better prices as opposed to when they're just working individually, which becomes very hard for them to access our markets. Certification programs are also very important. Last year, we got funding through some of our European partners, especially one organization in particular called Global Gap, that funded us to go into Southern and East Africa to really follow the supply chain from the farm level all the way to the supply chain into the supermarket level. So I was able to interview and talk to smallholder farmers, especially female smallholder farmers, and understanding their lives. How do you go from running your farm to being able to access a sophisticated supply chain, whether it's in South Africa. I was talking to female smallholder farmers that supply Massmart and Pick n Pay, and as some of you may know, Massmart is part of the Walmart investment in Africa. So we were able to really learn about all the different challenges that occur in the supply chain for women, but they absolutely need financing, and what I think we need is innovative financing packages. So what we do with the Institute is that as of this year, we're actually incubated within QS Capital, which is a global advisory, global investment transaction and advisory firm that really allows us now to move from catalytic philanthropy, which is what I've done for many years, to now bridging to entering impact investment, and from there to now being able to bring this type of understanding to private equity. Impact investment is still being defined, especially I think within the African space. What will that mean? And I think every day we're developing metrics, both on the social development side of things, because I'm always a development economist at heart, and so I always have to have social metrics, but also on then the financial metrics and the return to investors. But we're very excited about where we're going in terms of beginning to invest in entrepreneurs that will help female smallholder farmers meet the bottlenecks and constraints that they're facing in accessing supply chains. But the more we can move financing into women's hands, the more we're going to reduce poverty. Because the truth is that the agriculture sector is 4 times more likely to reduce poverty than any other sector. And if we can move more of that investment into women's hands, then we're going to address many issues at one time, and we stand a better chance of feeding 9 billion people by 2050.
Yeah. I think just talking with Hunter before the panel, we were both agreeing that the community of people here, we recognize the financing challenge and the need. There are innovative solutions, programmatic solutions, but tying those programmatic innovations to new ways of financing is something that we're still struggling with. So I think there's an open invitation from all of us, for the community, for Milken, maybe to get the benefit of your insights on how we can achieve this challenge. I heard one good idea recently, which I thought is a kind of project which shows financial innovation coupled with technical innovation. I think many of you probably know Mohamed Yunus. He has a collaboration with a French bank, and what they've come up with is an innovation around sort of micro measurement of rainfall, zonal micro measurement of rainfall, which enables them then to offer create an index of so how much rain you're getting in your local area, creating an index, and against that index they are able to offer micro insurance to the farmers. So they overcome the question of high cost, high transaction costs through a financial innovation tied to a technical innovation. So I thought that was very, very interesting. So Greg, in terms of some of the things about aggregating smallholders, bringing them up to speed, what are some of the innovations that you're supporting, and where do you see the need for greater innovation and new ideas?
So one example is a group called Partners in Food Security, which harnesses the human capital of Cargill's employees. General Mills is another firm involved, and we match them up with entrepreneurs primarily in East Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania. And they, in the era of internet communications, can share pictures, the challenges they're having. They're having trouble getting a bread that has stable shelf life, whatever they are. And so it's a great way to enlist our employees without the need for them to buy expensive tickets, and for them to be a continuous partner in advising these entrepreneurs that are working with the very women that Impul is talking about. And so I think that's been a great one of linking volunteerism with human capital with a really big need there, which is for these entrepreneurs to have the best Western technology that a General Mills could make available. And to complement the Indonesian government, and frankly in parts of Africa, one of the concerns we've had is getting governments to agree on what the amount of land a young woman needs to have in order to not only feed her family, but to start to build capital and to repay those loans. Indonesia, when they established their palm industry, I think made a lot of very good judgments. So we work with about 10,000 smallholders. And we build a world-scale processing plant. We can bring in bulk fertilizer. We can ship the products out on large-sized ocean-going vessels. And in spite of the fact that any one of those individual farmers is a relatively modest scale, they can enjoy the economies of scale of being part of a bigger entity. But importantly to that was the amount of land that each of these smallholders were allowed to have. You could, with a 10-key calculator, determine that they could earn a living. They could, at a reasonable price, they could get more income than would be necessary to pay their school fees and the whole issue of child labor and elementary education. So first we have a healthy child that mother had a good pregnancy. The first 720 days had a proper nourishment. Then we have to get them into school, and that requires the income of their parents. In Africa, we haven't seen that. And if you put prices so high that the smallholder could make enough money to pay school fees, the price for the small village consumer or the regional city consumer would be so high they can't pay it. And so balancing the need for adequate revenue for the farmer and affordable enough prices for off-farm consumers really comes down to how much land we're going to allow these people to farm. And until we deal, in many of these cases, with subscale, we're sentencing these people to a long life of poverty because that price that is fair to the farmer and affordable enough to the urban consumer just isn't being met.
I guess that would be a challenge in the cocoa belt.
Well, cocoa, it's less of a problem because it's an export commodity, and so clearly the families that are doing that, they are truly commercial. They know what the London futures are doing hour by hour. And they, of course, are selling a crop that they enjoy comparative advantage in and using that money to buy rice and flour and milk commercially. And so in the export-oriented businesses, which would also be true of the palm business in Indonesia, they are commercial farmers from the get-go, but they need to be allowed enough scale that at reasonable world prices, they earn a net income that will pay the school fees and buy the things that they're not going to grow themselves.
Very interesting.
Now in East Africa, or in East Africa, we will tend to see most of our cotton farmers will be, a half to a third of their acres will be in cotton, and the other 2/3 they will be growing most of their own, at least their own starch, and then they'll use the cash income from the cotton to buy protein and other off-farm.
Fascinating. So Axton, I think the Sun Business Network also is involved in this area of impact investing or looking at businesses that are helping communities address stunting. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I think one of the companies that I would like to highlight is actually an Ivory Coast, a company from Ivory Coast. It's actually started by a lady called Marie Kanote, and she managed to see an opportunity when where the stunting rate in Ivory Coast was 40%, and so she actually created a product for complementing breastfeeding, and that actually caught the eye of GAIN, and through the SAR network, she managed to get funding of about $2 million for a 5-year period, and that actually increased. I mean, right now her market share is about 30%. That's playing with the big boys, and I think how we should see it is that with nutrition, you can actually create a business out of it, and at the same time, help with the nutrition level of the bottom of the pyramids. So that's one of the examples.
I think we all touched on this area of innovation and looking for innovations, and I think I'd love the panel to come in and talk about some more examples. I think we at UNICEF, that's something that we're supporting. Here's one little innovation that we have, a very small thing. This is a Kid Power bracelet, and I hope you'll be hearing more about this in the coming weeks, which it's a Fitbit, I think it's called, which tracks the exercise of children, perhaps obese children in the US, and they earn points together in a class and they collaborate. And they also learn about issues, need for nutrition in other parts of the world, and the points that they earn through their Kid Power bracelet then translate into nutrition support in some countries. And it's a nice example of a fairly simple way of aligning nutrition to creating new resources. And it's sponsored by Disney and others, for which we're very, very grateful. But if you look at Hunter, for you, what are the exciting innovations that you see, or where do you see the greatest need for further innovation?
Well, I divide the WFP world as it relates to delivering of food into two areas. One is emergency, and one is the work that we do as it relates to our nutrition, long-term nutrition goals that we have, whether it's the first 1,000 days program or our school feeding programs, which are all about getting girls into schools and changing communities. But in terms of the emergency side, I think some of the most exciting innovations are in mobile technology. Not only in the way that you're able to deliver potentially assistance in the aftermath of an emergency, but also in the way that you are able to address an emergency and be able to inform people as to where to go, to have people through crowdsourcing create mapping. I would appeal to everybody right now, that's something that's happening right now in Nepal, is trying to figure out, as the death toll rises, we really still don't know the number of people that have been impacted, and we know that it's going to rise, unfortunately, a lot more as they get outside of Kathmandu to areas that are inaccessible right now. And this is shameless, but if you go to WFPUSA.org, that's a place to be able to contribute to people that are in grave need right now. But on that side, there's amazing mapping technology that we've been talking to Google. We've been working with companies like Facebook. We've been working with much smaller companies that have the ability, for instance, for farmers to, through mobile technology, to know the price that their crop is at any given moment, to be able to then create commodity exchanges. Like we have the first one I think ever created was in Ethiopia, which is incredible. What's her name? Eleni, who's amazing. And so on that side there, and then there are other technologies that have existed for over, for thousands of years. So, for instance, bun technology in terms of growing, which is being used in Turkana for the sorghum that they're growing there, which a number of Israeli agriculture experts came in and said, well, this was used 2,000 years ago, it should probably be able to work right now, and being able to implement that and being able to grow crops that actually are sustainable, that create that are able to hold water in places that there is water is a real issue. And so one of the things that we're working on at WFP USA is trying to bring together, and we talked about this a little bit as it relates to the financial sector, is trying to create maybe with a group that we've been working with in Washington, is to create an innovation lab, to bring in people that are actually providing solutions on a small scale that we could have a real goal of scaling up in a way that could actually reach, as Greg said, all of those local areas that are impacted or affected by the need that have food insecurity. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot more, but.
Well, I mean, since Saturday when the earthquake happened, it's sort of been taking over my life and sure Hunter's as well. But you know, I'm very struck by the biblical lesson of the seven was it fat camels and the 7 thin camels. Why is it that we're not more prepared when these emergencies hit? It's really about managing risk, and I think the financial community knows about risk, and I would appeal to you to come and work with us, come work with WFP together and look for new solutions. I can't believe, I just thought we were getting going with this conversation, but I see we only have a few minutes left, which is unbelievable. So I would love to hear any questions, comments from the audience very, very quickly before we wrap up. And sorry for rabbiting on so much. So does anyone in the audience want to jump in? Please do, and please introduce yourself.
Jean-Pierre Fouary with X1. President Cargill made an interesting comment that Africa and other developing nations aren't taking advantage of technology around drying and canning food and freezing it, and I'm wondering why we're not doing more of that here in the U.S. with such an abundance of food being thrown away that could easily be dried, canned, and frozen and shipped where it's needed most.
Yeah. Let's get any other thoughts on the table, and I'll ask the panel to jump in because we're short of time. Has anyone else got anything else they want to throw in?
AJ Gandhi, partner to Mpule at QS Capital. So this question is actually directed at the chairman of Cargill. We see that in retail, there are cooperative partnerships around sharing information, sharing detail. Likewise, we see in banking that there are common platforms upon which organizations trade. Now, within food security, there is a nexus between you guys, between the chemical providers, between GMO organizations, and between warehousing and other distribution. Is there any talk of having collaborative partnerships which would then have a common pool to be able to support initiatives at a more sustainable level?
Okay. And just anyone else before we ask Greg to, I think most of those questions were coming your way, so that would be great. So that would be great.
Well, first, I believe they exist. I think that most of the genetics companies are very active. They understand that their success is ultimately dependent on societal acceptance from a consumer standpoint, and also from the farmer seeing a net benefit to their expenditure in better seeds. I always try to caution people that these seeds are not compelled onto any farmer, and certainly we still have farmers here in the United States that continue to feed or to plant conventionally bred seeds, and that is their choice, and it's an economic decision. And the others, in fact, the vast majority make the other decision, which it's worth the investment. And our own test plots would tell us that about 2/3 or more of the value of the genetics that you buy accrues to the farmer, since they're doing the work, and 1/3 or less goes to the seed company, which still makes them significantly profitable. But I think we have the benefit in the U.S. of a land-grant university system that's been an incredible treasure for the country, and I think there's more that can be done to make sure that the dissemination of best practices goes more quickly, and I think a lot of people are working hard to get that done. On the preservation, the time to do it is when it's picked, right? And the infrastructure needs to be put in place that to send fresh produce out and then to haul it back because it didn't sell at the end of the day or something is probably not the model that's going to evolve. So I think we see and are aware of some people that we work through partners in food security that have made solar-based dehydrators in Tanzania in particular, and it's made an enormous difference of dealing with this onslaught of produce that comes in. They're drying these, dehydrating them to levels that they can be powdered, and then they're used later on to reconstitute soups and other foods. And so more of those kinds of ideas that aren't dependent on a functioning electrical grid and can be built cheaply enough that they really can deal with what is seasonally, when they have good rains and good conditions, an onslaught of produce is probably the way to address that in the third world.
I think just the sort of kind of insights that Greg can provide as, from his position at Cargill are precisely an example of how much we in an international community have to gain from greater participation by the private sector. So essentially, to wrap up the panel, you know, we've talked about innovation, we've talked about solutions, we've talked about need. It's all out there. I think it's really, we want to appeal to you to say, this is a very strategic area for you to get involved with. There are all kinds of areas that your skills, capabilities, and knowledge can contribute to winning the fight against nutrition, and that we are all open for either in the UN side or through NGOs and private sector, startup businesses that Mpule is working with, or through the Sun Business Network that Axton is working on, of course through WFP and UNICEF. We are all open to involvement, and we hope you will join us in this fight. Thanks very much.
Thank you.